Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are we're stepping right into the fire. And I mean that quite literally.
Yeah, we really are.
If you are listening to this, just check your calendar. It is Sunday, March 1st, 2026.
A date that I think historians are likely going to be writing about for a very, very long time.
Exactly. We are essentially on day 2 of what is shaping up to be a massive, perhaps definitional escalation in the Middle East. If you've been glued to the news feeds or, doing the doom scroll on social media, you know the basics, massive airstrikes have hit Tehran.
And we aren't talking about remote outposts in the desert here.
Right. No, we are talking about government buildings, urban centers, and according to the reports we're seeing on the ground, civilian areas too.
And the response to that has been immediate. I mean, we aren't seeing a pause.
No.
We aren't seeing a diplomatic timeout to let the dust settle or, back-channel talks. We are seeing a rapid, sustained, and very specific military retaliation from Iran.
Right. And that is exactly where today's deep dive comes in. Because in the fog of war, it is incredibly easy to get lost in the noise.
Oh, absolutely. The breaking news banners, the conflicting casualty counts, the sheer panic of it all.
Yeah, it's overwhelming. But we have a source today that gives us a very specific, a very distinct vantage point.
We do. We are strictly looking at an in-depth interview conducted just hours ago, literally while the smoke is still rising.
Yeah.
It's an interview between geopolitical analyst Glenn Deason and Professor Saeed Mohammed Marandi.
And for those who don't know Marandi, let's just establish who he is quickly. He isn't just an academic observing this from a safe distance somewhere in Europe.
Right.
He's a professor at the University of Tehran. Yes, but he's also a former advisor to the nuclear negotiation team. He is effectively a voice from inside the system.
Precisely. And what makes this source material so critical right now is that Marandi is speaking from Tehran.
Right there on the ground.
He is describing the view from the ground as the strikes are happening. But more importantly for us, he is laying out the strategic logic, the why behind Iran's response.
And that logic, it is not what a lot of Western analysts were predicting. It's surprisingly calculated almost.
It is highly counterintuitive, and that is really our mission today. We are going to unpack this concept of a war of attrition.
Yeah.
We need to look at the specific military tactics Marandi describes. Specifically, this idea of using old tech to fight a hypermodern war.
And we have to talk about the psychological side of this too, because there was a major assassination involved here, the killing of a high-ranking Iranian leader.
Which is huge.
It is. And the Western narrative of how that plays out is very, very different from the reality Marandi is describing on the streets of Tehran today.
It brings us to deep cultural concepts like Ashura and the whole martyr narrative, which we really need to understand if we want to grasp where this conflict is going next.
Absolutely. Now, before we dive in, a quick disclaimer for you listening at home. We are dealing with an active, hot conflict here.
Yes, we are.
Our goal on the deep dive is always to unpack the source material. So we are reporting on the content of this interview to understand the logic and the events described by Professor Marandi.
We are analyzing his arguments.
Exactly. We are not endorsing specific political viewpoints or taking sides. We just want to know, what is the strategy here?
Right. We want to understand the mechanics of the conflict from his perspective. So let's just start with the immediate situation, the state of play, if you will.
Okay, let's set the scene. According to the interview, U.S. and Israeli forces struck Tehran. Marandi mentions that even his friends' homes were damaged.
Which really emphasizes that these weren't just surgical strikes on military silos. These hit the city center.
And the retaliation was instant. Marandi points out that unlike previous flare-ups where there might be a wait-and-see period or, a symbolic gesture.
Like firing into an empty field.
Right, like that. This time, Iran launched missiles and drones almost immediately. And the target list is really interesting.
It's very extensive. Obviously, Israel, or as Marandi refers to it, the Israeli regime was hit. But he specifically highlights that U.S. assets and military compounds across the entire region are being targeted.
And this is a crucial distinction. It's not just about hitting the people who launched the planes. It's about hitting the infrastructure that supports them.
Yes. Marandi lists the Gulf states specifically. The UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, and Oman.
Yeah, let's pause on that for a second. He mentions that the focus has been heavily on the Emirates and Bahrain. Why those two specifically? Why not everyone equally?
Well, just look at the map. These are the hosts of significant U.S. military assets. Bahrain is essentially an aircraft carrier made of sand. It hosts the U.S. Fifth Fleet.
Wow, okay.
And the UAE hosts major air bases like Al Dhafra. Marandi's argument is that if you host the assets that are attacking us, You are part of the battlefield.
So you don't get to hold the coat of the guy punching me and say you aren't involved.
Exactly. You are providing the staging ground, so you are a valid target in their eyes.
But here is the thing that really caught my attention in the transcript, and I think this is where the deep dive really starts. Morandi says something that sounds almost backwards. He says the Iranians have been mostly using older weapons, older drones, older missiles.
Yes. This is the old weapon tactic, and it is a classic element of a war of attrition, but it's rarely seen on this scale in modern tech-heavy warfare.
Okay, I need you to make the math make sense for me here, because on paper, this looks like suicide. You're facing the United States Air Force and the Israeli Air Defense Network.
The most advanced military machine in human history.
Right, and you're launching, what, lawnmower engines with wings?
Essentially, yes.
Right.
And that is exactly why it's brilliant in a terrifying cold calculus sort of way. Let's look at the specs. Morandi is likely referring to platforms like the Shahed 136 or older variants of the Arash drone.
The moped of the sky, as some people call it.
Exactly. It's loud, it's slow, maybe 115 miles per hour. A World War II fighter plane could catch it. A helicopter could shoot it down with a door gun.
So why use it?
Here is the variable that changes everything, the cost. Estimates put a Shahed at somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000 to manufacture.
Wow.
You can build them in a garage. You can build them with off-the-shelf parts.
Okay, $20,000. That's the price of a used Honda Civic.
Right. Now imagine you are the air defense commander on a U.S. destroyer, or you're manning an Iron Dome battery outside Tel Aviv. You see this thing coming on your radar.
Okay.
It's carrying a 50-kilogram warhead. If it hits the barracks or the oil refinery or the embassy, people die. Infrastructure burns.
Yeah.
You have to intercept it.
You can't just let it fly. The political cost of a strike is just too high.
You absolutely cannot. So you fire an interceptor. If you're using the Iron Dome, that Tamir missile costs roughly $40,000 to $50,000.
Okay, so that's a roughly 1-to-1 trade. Not terrible.
Not bad. But the Iron Dome gets overwhelmed quickly when you send a swarm of 50 of them at once. So then you have to move to the bigger systems.
Like the Patriot.
Exactly. Or David Sling. That's $1 million per shot. Or if you were a U.S. Navy ship protecting the Gulf, you might be firing an SM-2 or an ESSM. Now, you are talking $2 million, maybe $4 million per shot.
To shoot down a used Honda Civic.
Yes.
So you're creating a luxury condo for a used car every single time.
And that is the attrition trap. Morandi is saying Iran has stockpiled thousands of these cheap decoys. They aren't trying to blow up the target with Wave 1.
They're trying to blow up the U.S. budget.
They want to empty the magazines.
Morandi calls it depletion.
Precisely. Every time a Patriot battery fires at a drone that is one less interceptor available for when the real threat comes, you force the enemy to burn through their expensive limited stock of high-tech interceptors to stop your cheap junk.
And the real threat is what Morandi calls the hidden arsenal.
Yes. He is very clear on this. He says the new generation of missiles, the hypersonic SATAs, the precision-guided Sejals, have rarely been used or haven't been used at all yet in this initial exchange.
It's strategic reserve.
It's the queen on the chessboard. You don't bring her out until the pawns have cleared the way. Morandi notes that since 2003, basically since the U.S. invasion of Iraq, Iran has been preparing for exactly this scenario.
Because they knew they couldn't match the U.S. Air Force plane for plane in the sky.
Exactly. So they went underground.
Deep underground.
Yeah.
He describes these underground cities, silos and launch facilities built hundreds of feet down under mountains, specifically designed to survive bunker-busting bombs.
So the logic is, let the enemy blow up the surface targets. Let them feel good about hitting an empty warehouse. Let them exhaust their expensive ammo shooting down our old drones.
Right.
And keep the advanced precision-guided missiles safe in a silo until the enemy is blinking on low ammo.
That is wild. And Morandi points out that the underground capabilities directed toward the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean, meaning the ones targeting ships and carriers, are even more extensive than what is aimed at Israel.
That is a terrifying thought if you are a naval commander in the region.
But there was one surprise, wasn't there? Amidst all this talk of drones and missiles, Morandi mentioned something that I think caught a lot of people off guard.
Yeah.
He says the Iranian Air Force participated in the strikes.
Yes, manned aircraft.
Which usually Western analysts just dismiss. They say, oh, Iran's Air Force is antiquated. They're flying F-14 Tomcats from the Top Gun era. They wouldn't dare fly into modern air defenses.
That has been the standard assessment for decades. But the fact that they sortied and conducted strikes, and Morandi implies they were effective, suggests They have capabilities, or at least a level of daring, that wasn't fully factored into the collapse models.
Morandi says this specifically angered the Americans. It disrupted the narrative that Iran would just hide in bunkers.
It shows a level of operational complexity, coordinating drone swarms to drain the batteries, ballistic missiles to hit the hard targets, and manned airstrikes simultaneously.
Yeah, that's not simple.
No, that is not the sign of a military that's falling apart on day two. That is a complex, integrated kill chain.
Okay, so that is the military maneuvering. But wars aren't just fought with missiles, they are fought with money. They are fought in the markets. And Morandi paints a pretty bleak picture for the neighbors.
He calls it the glass house problem.
Which is such a vivid image. People in glass houses shouldn't throw stones.
But in this case, people in glass houses shouldn't host the guy throwing stones. He's talking about the UAE, Bahrain, Qatar. These are nations that have built incredible wealth, gleaming skylines, massive tourism, and finance hubs.
I want to drill down on this glasshouse concept because it's a great image, but does it hold up economically? Why are they more vulnerable than Iran?
Think about what Dubai actually is. It's a miracle in the desert. It's tourism. It's real estate. It's a transit hub for Emirates Airlines. It relies 100% on the perception of safety.
Right. You don't book a honeymoon in a war zone. You don't hold a global banking conference in a city under air raid sirens.
Exactly. But it's deeper than tourism. Morandi brings up the Kuwait precedent to drive this home.
Remind us of that history.
So go back to 1989. Before Saddam Hussein invaded, Kuwait was considered the jewel of the Persian Gulf. It was the financial hub. It was where the money lived. It was the London of the Gulf.
Then 1990 happens. Saddam invades.
And the war wasn't that long, historically speaking. The U.S. coalition kicked Saddam out in a matter of months. Kuwait was liberated. It received reparations. The buildings were rebuilt. But Morandi's point is the money never fully came back.
The dominance was lost.
The dominance shifted. The banks moved to Dubai. The headquarters moved to Doha. Because capital is cowardly. It has zero loyalty. It flees risk instantly.
Wow, that's a great way to put it. Capital is cowardly.
And Morandi's argument is that if Dubai or Doha become targets, the glass house shatters. Even if the war ends in a month, the economic power might shift permanently away from them.
He mentions that the mere existence of the conflict on day two is already crashing markets there.
And that's the vulnerability. Iran has been living under sanctions and economic hardship for 40 years. They are, in a sense, hardened to economic pain. They know how to survive with a devalued currency.
But the Gulf states.
Their entire model is based on seamless, frictionless luxury and safety.
So Iran is concrete, and the UAE is crystal. One crack and the value proposition shatters.
Exactly. And then there's the oil, the big one, the Strait of Hormuz.
Usually when we talk about war with Iran, the threat is Iran will close the strait, meaning they will put mines in the water or use speedboats to stop tankers. It's the nuclear option of energy markets.
Right. That's the standard scenario. But Morandi takes it a step further in this interview. He says, sure, we could close the strait, but that's not the real threat. The real threat is destroying the production facilities themselves.
Explain the difference there. Why does that matter more?
Think of the strait as a highway. If you close the highway, you block the trucks. But eventually, the U.S. Navy can clear the mines, sink the speedboats, and reopen the road. It might take weeks, it might be messy, but the oil is still sitting there in the tanks waiting to be shipped.
Okay, so the product still exists.
But Morandi says Iran doesn't just have to close the strait. They have the capability to destroy the production facilities. If you blow up the pumping stations, the desulfurization plants the refineries.
Oh.
It doesn't matter if the strait is wide open. There's no oil to put on the ships.
That is a much longer-term problem. That's not a traffic jam. That's a factory fire.
That takes years to rebuild.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, the global economy goes into cardiac arrest. That is the leverage Morandi is talking about. He is saying, you think you can bomb us into submission. We can turn the lights off for the entire world.
And he has a specific warning for Saudi Arabia in this mix, doesn't he?
He does. There was a speculation in the interview about Saudi Arabia potentially joining the attack or allowing their airspace to be used. Morandi calls this utterly foolish.
Why? Saudi has a massive military budget.
2 reasons. 1, he points to Yemen. He says, look, Saudi Arabia spent years trying to defeat the Houthis in Yemen, which is a much smaller, poorer force, and couldn't do it.
Right. That war dragged on for nearly a decade.
And 2, the threat of a second front. He says if Saudi attacks Iran, Yemen will likely open a full-scale front against Saudi Arabia again from the south. So the kingdom would be crushed between Iran to the north and Yemen to the south.
It really highlights how interconnected this axis of resistance is. It's not just fighting one country, it's fighting a network.
Which brings us to the event that triggered a huge part of this emotional response, the assassination.
Right. We really need to talk about the leader.
In the source material, they discuss the assassination of a very high-ranking Iranian leader. They don't name him by title in this specific clip, but the description is of a towering figure within the state.
And Morandi shares some really surprising and humanizing details here. I think this is important because in the West, these figures are often presented as two-dimensional villains, just guys in fatigues chanting slogans.
Exactly. Morandi describes him as a scholar, someone who spoke 4 languages, Persian, Azari, Arabic, and English.
And he mentions his reading habits. This part fascinated me. He says his favorite novel was Les Miserables by Victor Hugo.
Which is incredibly telling, isn't it?
It is. Les Miserables isn't just a story about a guy stealing bread. It's a story about justice, about the downtrodden fighting against a rigid, unyielding system. It's about redemption and sacrifice.
Right.
If that's his favorite book, it gives you a glimpse into how he saw himself. Not as a terrorist, but as a Jean Valjean figure, protecting the weak against a powerful, unjust authority.
Morandi also mentions his history. He was a veteran of the Iran-Iraq War. He fought as a volunteer. He wasn't a career military man initially. He went to the front lines because of belief. He visited the front lines to boost morale.
Yes, and the circumstances of his death are crucial to the narrative being built. He wasn't in a bunker.
No. Morandi's very adamant about refuting the Western propaganda that he was hiding. He says he was in his office, he was fasting for Ramadan, he was working.
He refused to leave.
He reportedly said many citizens have nowhere to go, so I won't flee either.
Yeah.
Now, whether you, the listener, believe that account or view it as propaganda, the effect of that story on the Iranian public is what matters. It creates a legend.
And this is where we get to the cultural disconnect. You mentioned Ashura earlier. This feels like the key to unlocking the Iranian mindset here.
It is the most important part of the interview for understanding the psychology of the conflict. In the West, military planners think in terms of decapitation strikes.
The logic being this is a dictatorship. It's a pyramid. If you blow up the guy at the top, the pyramid crumbles. Chaos ensues, the people rise up, and the regime collapses.
It's the snake in the head theory.
Right.
But Morandi says this reveals a total ignorance of Shia Islam and Iranian culture. He brings up Ashura.
For our listeners who might not be steeped in Shia theology, break down Ashura. What is the story?
So Ashura commemorates the death of Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, at the Battle of Karbala in the year 680 A.D.
Okay, set the scene for us.
Hussein is surrounded. He has a tiny force, maybe 72 family members and companions. He is facing an overwhelming army led by the Caliph Yazid. It is a hopeless situation. Strategically, militarily, it is a guaranteed defeat.
So the rational move, the Western move, is to surrender. Cut a deal. Save your life.
Exactly. That's what a military analyst would say. Preserve your force. But Hussein doesn't surrender. He chooses to stand and fight, knowing he will be massacred, because to submit to an unjust tyrant is worse than death. He was martyred.
So in this narrative, victory isn't about surviving.
Exactly. Victory is about resistance. Victory is about refusing to bow to the tyrant even if it kills you.
So apply this to today.
Morandi argues that by assassinating this leader, the U.S. and Israel didn't decapitate the regime. They unknowingly cast themselves in the role of Yazid the tyrant. And they turned the leader into Imam Hussein.
They turned a politician into a martyr.
Precisely. Morandi says this creates intense unity. It doesn't demoralize the population, it enrages them and gives them a spiritual purpose. It turns the war into a holy struggle against injustice. It strengthens soft power.
So instead of people saying, oh no, our leader is dead, we should give up, they say our leader died like Hussein, now he must fight like Hussein.
That's the narrative flip. And Morandi argues the West is completely blind to this because of their own biases.
He uses some strong language about those biases. He talks about the false narrative of collapse.
He does. He points out that the West has been predicting the collapse of the Islamic Republic for over 40 years. Every protest, every sanction, every election, the headline in the New York Times and the Washington Post is always, is this the end of the mullahs?
Why do they keep getting it wrong? I mean, 40 years is a long time to be wrong about the exact same thing.
Morandi blames the echo chamber. He says Western policymakers don't talk to actual Iranians living in Iran. They talk to the diaspora. They talk to exiles.
People who left the country and inherently hate the government.
Right. If you ask a Cuban exile in Miami about Castro, you get a very different picture than if you ask someone in Havana. Morandi specifically mentions trolls in Albania. referring to the MEK, which is an Iranian opposition group based there. He claims they are funded to flood social media and reinforce this bias.
So the intelligence is just circular. The policymakers want to hear that the regime is weak. The exiles tell them the regime is weak. The policymakers base their war plans on the regime being weak, and then reality hits.
And that reality is what Morandi calls the brick wall. He argues that the Iranian state is actually quite robust. He points out that they have lost presidents before, they lost General Soleimani, they lost President Raisi in a helicopter crash.
And the system didn't collapse.
Exactly. It has institutions, not just individuals.
He attributes this blindness to Orientalism.
Yeah, this idea that Oriental despotisms are brittle, that without the big man, the natives can't organize themselves. Morandi says this is racism, plain and simple. It prevents Western analysts from seeing the sophistication of the Iranian state.
He also uses a very specific, very biting phrase to describe the Western elite. He calls them the Epstein class.
That stopped me in my tracks when I heard it. It's a visceral insult.
It is. It's not just calling them corrupt.
No. By invoking Jeffrey Epstein, he's characterizing the Western political and financial elite as morally bankrupt, predatory, and completely disconnected from the reality of normal human beings.
He says they are too drunk on power to understand the ground reality.
It frames the conflict not as democracy versus authoritarianism, which is the Western frame, but as the faithful and oppressed versus the decadent and corrupt. It fits perfectly into that Ashura narrative we talked about earlier.
So we have the military trap with the old drones, the economic glass house of the Gulf, and the martyrdom narrative fueling the population. Where does this go? How does Morandi see the end game?
He frames it as a clash of timelines. Blitzkrieg versus attrition.
The U.S. wants it quick.
The U.S. model, the regime change model, relies on overwhelming force, shock, and awe, breaking the enemy's will in weeks, like the Libya campaign, like the initial invasion of Iraq.
And Iran's goal?
Survival. Just keep standing. Morandi says Iran is digging in for a long, grinding war.
This brings us back to the logistics. Morandi talks about the logistics nightmare for the U.S.
Geography is a stubborn thing. Morandi points out that to bomb Tehran U.S. fighter jets, if they're launching from carriers or distant bases to avoid the Iranian missile rain, have to fly long distances.
He mentions mid-air refueling.
Twice. They have to refuel twice just to get to the target and back. That puts incredible strain on the airframes. It causes wear and tear. Jets need maintenance. They need parts. Pilots get fatigued. You can do that for a week. Can you do it for 6 months?
And ammunition.
That's the big one. We go back to the old weapon tactic. If Iran has thousands of cheap decoys and the U.S. has a limited number of high-tech missiles, Morandi questions the math. How long can the U.S. sustain that expenditure?
He references a 12-day war model.
He implies that in a previous conflict, likely referring to conflicts involving Israel and Hezbollah or Hamas, the intense operational tempo could only be sustained for about a week or two before stockpiles ran low and political will fractured.
So Iran's plan is survive day 1 through day 12, absorb the pain, let the U.S. burn through its ammo and its patience, and
then pile on the pressure. Once the enemy is exhausted, that's when you start using the strategic reserve from the underground silos. That's when the sigils fly.
Morandi predicts a strategic defeat for the U.S.
He believes it comes down to a battle of wills. And this is a classic asymmetric warfare concept. For the U.S., this is a war of choice. They can leave, they can go home. The U.S. homeland is not under attack.
Right.
For Iran, it is an existential war. They have nowhere else to go. Historically, the side fighting for its existence usually has a much higher pain tolerance. They will eat grass if they have to. The U.S. public will panic if gas prices go up by $1.
It's a sobering analysis.
It is. It totally reframes the definition of winning.
So let's try to synthesize this. We have a source who is telling us, you think you are winning because you blew up some buildings and killed a leader, but actually you are hitting exactly the targets we wanted you to hit. You are wasting your money on decoys, you are unifying our population through martyrdom, and you are trapped in a war of attrition you can't afford.
That is the core argument. It's a complete inversion of the CNN or BBC narrative we are seeing on the screens right now.
And the danger, as Morandi highlights, is the echo chamber. If Western intelligence only listens to people who agree with them, they miss this entire layer of strategy.
Reminds me of that image of the leader reading Les Miserables.
Yeah.
You know, in the book, Inspector Javert spends his whole life hunting Jean Valjean because he believes the law is absolute and Valjean is a criminal. Javert cannot conceive of a world where Valjean is the good guy. His worldview is rigid.
And when he is finally forced to confront the reality that Vajan is actually a moral man.
He breaks. He literally cannot process it, and he destroys himself. Morandi is suggesting the West is Inspector Javert, rigid, convinced of its own moral superiority, reliant on a narrative that doesn't fit the facts, and heading for a psychological break when reality refuses to conform to that narrative.
That is a powerful image to leave us with, the idea that rigid narratives can be just as dangerous as missiles.
It really is.
Morandi ends with a provocative thought. He says the West is incapable of learning because of these narratives. He says they have been wrong about the collapse for 47 years.
And the question he leaves hanging is, what are the consequences of betting the entire stability of the Middle East on being right this time?
Is this the moment the brick wall of reality finally breaks the narrative? That is the question we are all watching unfold in real time.
Indeed. And if Morandi is right, the next few weeks are going to look very different from what the pundits are predicting.
We are going to keep monitoring the situation as it develops. This was a heavy one, but essential to understand the other side of the hill. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. Stay safe out there.